Everybody remembers their first love. Hey there movers and groovers, you've tuned into 105 Radio Young Dudes, and as I sit here reminiscing into the bottom of a whiskey glass of faded childhood summers, I'd like to play you a new song. This one's called Everybody Remembers Their First Love, and it's dedicated to a very special lady out there. You know who you are. Sometimes, the most passionate love is the unobtainable kind. Women flock to sell-out tours of boy bands around the world and jump onto live train tracks when their idols get married. Guys dream of one day accidentally bumping into Christina Aguilera and delivering the perfect chat-up line that captures her interest. When you crave someone and think of them constantly, especially when you're young, you need a resilient heart to survive the trauma of actually getting that person. And losing them. Sometimes, the person isn't even a celebrity. Sometimes, it's your best friend's girlfriend. Everybody remembers their first love and the often accompanying first heartbreak. I certainly do, and while I won't claim to have suffered more than the average person, at the time, it certainly felt that way. The events in this story mark a turning point in my life, a transformation from an extremely gawky teenager into a confident, not unattractive young man. Let Uncle Chris elaborate for you. This is 1995. And with the Beatles pumping through my Walkman and the sun of a new summer beating down on my face as I walked, I was what Tarantino's scripts might classify as one young, hip, happening, happy-ass motherfucker. I'd spent countless summers as a youth hanging around on the beach, chasing girls, and getting drunk. Every summer, there was an influx of Scandinavians arriving for short 2-week English courses in my town, creating what felt like a Bagam and Shagam city, with guys falling over themselves to make out with all the stunning Swedes and Norwegians milling around the seafront. It was often quite amusing to watch English girls trying to keep their men from deviating toward the more often than not prettier and more feminine Scandinavian chicks, who were just looking for a bit of fun and a few memories to take home with them. Those were fantastic and hectic days, full of adventure and passion, and more often than not, fierce heartbreak as the girl you'd just fallen in love with waved goodbye tearfully through the window of the taxi on her way to the airport. All in all, I cherished those days of my youth, which left me with an adoration for Scandinavian babes that would only be surpassed by my future affection for Japanese chicks. However, enough of that, it's irrelevant to the tale I'm going to tell. This story is about one girl, the one girl I think we can all relate to, the first love.
Hey Chris. U-C-U-N-T. Are you coming down to the pier tonight for a piss-up? Screamed the drunken voice of one of my friends. It was Chubbs, calling me on the phone amidst the merry singing of what sounded like more than one of my regular summer drinking buddies. My mum was nearby, and I cringed as she looked at me with disdain, overhearing his loud voice. Guys who hang out together rarely refer to each other as friends in England, often preferring to use more vulgar yet playful terms to address their closest pals. Yeah, you know you're definitely one of the dudes when they greet you with bitch, monkey man, war, or the ever-affectionate faggot. It was already 7:30, and they were all drunk. Actually, so was I, but I'd been doing my loner thing during the day. At 18 and on the dole, there was nothing better to do, either look for a job when there weren't any or hang around on a sunny beach all day, think philosophy about shit, or go home to an irate mother who, having just endured a stressful day at work, was more than happy to unload her grief none too politely on her parasitic, worthless, lazy sod of a son. I'd just come back for 10 minutes and had already received an earful of it. 10 minutes more, and I think I would have definitely cracked a chair over the old girl's head, so you can imagine my relief when the phone rang and Chubbs gave me a good excuse to get the hell out of there. Grabbing my jacket and a cold can of cider from the fridge, I dashed off with my mum's curses still ringing in my ear. An hour later, I was sniffing glue with my buddies in a public toilet somewhere along the seafront. Drinking cocktails of whiskey and Bacardi in nowhere near safe moderation was better than sex for me, not that I'd had any by that age. I was still wondering who the hell the people were around me. I guess we were just lost boys who hardly knew each other, yet we were united by one common cause, to get laid before the end of the summer. These guys were like ghosts I never saw after winter crawled in, back to their dull jobs or education, no doubt, who'd return every summer, same time, same place, same purpose. In fact, Chubbs was the only guy I'd regularly hung out with. Not that we had that much in common, but he lived close, liked to drink, and was uglier than me, so that was good enough. Our whole relationship was based on competitiveness: who could smoke more dope, who could drink the most, who was better at video games, and who could get the prettiest girl. I have to hand it to him, on the last point, Chubbs won hands down. We spotted her while smoking some ganja on a bench in the pedestrian zone along the seafront. Well, I spotted her, everyone else's attention was focused on rolling the next spliff. As I glanced over my shoulder to see if anybody was near, I saw a Hawaiian-esque beauty coming toward me, her wind-blown soft brown hair emanating like lambent flame through the sunlight. I could hardly take my eyes off her. I felt drawn to her. Like an idiot, I let her pass me by, but was that a smile I saw on her lips? The only love of my life at that time was the cans of cider I constantly drank from. I was a lonely guy. Anyway, later on, hours after the alcohol had run dry, I was starting to get sober, which was never a good thing. The bouncers at the International Student Disco had grown wise to the fact that we were all actually English lads, despite our pathetic attempts to procure foreign accents. Well, actually, it was the others who hashed it up. My Gerard Depardieu was pretty good. So we couldn't gain entry anymore, which meant we were screwed and decided to drink again at the pier pub. The dangerous cocktails of Hinder were starting to take effect, and I was feeling like I could spew at any moment. Chubbs, however, was keen to continue checking out the birds hanging outside the front of the pier, so I suggested he go alone, and I'd join him once my stomach settled. What a mistake! I'd almost given up on waiting for him to come back and was just about to call it a night when he walked back into the pub with a big grin on his fat bastard face. Apparently, he'd just hooked up with some girl he'd met outside and was thrilled to bits, claiming she was beautiful. Now, usually, when Chubbs says a girl is beautiful, they're the kind of girls that could audition for a remake of The Elephant Man. So a week later, when I was preparing to meet Chubbs and his new girlfriend, I was dubious, to say the least. As I entered the pub we'd agreed to meet at, I saw the outline of Chubbs and the girl, and a mild shock equivalent to that of a truck hitting me ran up my spine. When I walked around to face him, I realized my fears were true, the babe from the seafront. Oh man! She was even foxier than I'd thought before. With Chubbs? That chunky butt waster? I couldn't believe it. I smiled at the happy-looking couple, but inside, my heart was bleeding. I had a major attack of the green-eyed monster. Chubbs didn't know what love was. He was, in a manner of speaking, a grunt, the kind of guy who spent his life in the pub, chasing anything with a C-U-N-T and a heartbeat, and with the charm of pond life. A girl was simply a trophy for him to display in front of admirers. He never dreamed of finding that perfect girl who could love him and treat him well, and vice versa. He was totally a I don't care if you've got a headache, you're shagging tonight, or you're walking home alone kind of guy. It never bothered me before that he'd been with girls and I hadn't, as the kind of girls he'd gone with were the ones everybody goes with. But this girl, this beauty. I could tell she was special before she even opened her mouth. A bum like Chubbs was simply unworthy. There's just no other way to describe it. Chris, this is Vivian. So, her name was Vivian. Well, that wasn't her real name, but the one I'm giving you. Actually, years later, when I asked her mother why she had chosen that particular unique name for her daughter, she said it meant princess in Chinese and was the first name that had come to her mind when the child was born. And if there ever were a girl that fit the description of a princess, Vivian was it. Ha ha! So for a minute there you thought I was chasing a non-Asian chick? No way dudes, evil Chris likes what he likes, and there ain't no getting away from yellow fever from this pitiful sex-mad Brit. Saying that, Vivian was actually born and raised in England, a product of a Taiwanese mother and a British ex-soldier who would return from Taiwan with a pregnant wife he would later beat to the brink of death, until she finally gathered the courage to leave him. To raise 2 kids in a foreign land when you hardly speak the language is no menial task. Vivian was exquisite. By some grace of nature, she seemed to harbor the ideal characteristics of the 2 nations that she was derived from, both mentally and physically. On the British side, she had a long, curvaceous body with ample cleavage, yet with a petite waist only found in women from the Far East, or in cartoon characters. She had mystical brown eyes, but they shone with humor and sunshine, in no way comparable to those of the skeptical, untrusting Chinese. She was everything I found attractive in English and Asian women rolled into one perfect Barbie doll package. I joke you not, often English women to me seem to be as aggressive as female Klingons you see on Star Trek, but Vivian, although basically English, had been raised singly by her Taiwanese mother, and as a byproduct of that, was very feminine and gracious. I luxuriated in her company and felt an attraction to her which was hard to hide. I couldn't have asked for a more perfect girlfriend. But she wasn't mine. Hideous fate had destined it never to be. Winter came and went. As autumn approached, my feelings for Vivian grew and grew. I'd hoped that the spell she had on me would eventually wear off, but the more I saw her, the fonder I became. We formed a close circle of three: me, Vivian, and Chubbs. Although Vivian often tried to pair me off with her friends, she gradually came to the realization that I was completely and utterly in love with her, a rumor that had spread through our group, likely instigated by my brother, who was probably sick of my constant chatter about how she was my dream girl and how I wished I'd beaten Chubbs to her. It was the big secret in the group. Chubbs may have cottoned on, but nobody knew for sure, and he never confronted me about it, instead relishing the pleasure of knowing that this time, he truly had won over me. I had to figure out a way to prove to Vivian that I was the better guy. Fuck it, I knew it was immature at the time, but I wanted her so badly that I was unable to sleep. So, like any sneaky bastard who can't convince a girl he's the right guy for her, I tried to convince her family of it instead. Win them over, win the girl perhaps? Yeah, the things I do to get laid. I'd managed to get an invite to Vivian's 3-bedroom flat, which she shared with her mum and her sister, by a hum. Accidentally bumping into the whole family in Sainsbury's and expressing curiosity about what Vivian's place looked like. I mentioned that I'd never tried Taiwanese food before. Without further ado, her mother declared she would cook me a whole banquet of Taiwanese dishes that very night. Dressed in my best, I arrived at the door a quarter of an hour early, bringing a box of chocolates for the family. Vivian opened the door, and she was radiant as usual. I noticed her cobalt-painted toenails and couldn't believe how much something like that could turn me on. Shit, even this chick's feet got me going, I remember thinking as I walked in and handed the present to her mum, who was not your typical Asian woman and gave me a huge hug for doing so. I was so aroused and excited to be surrounded by beautiful, exotic women for the first time in my life, with the smell of perfume lingering in the air. That feeling still sticks in my mind to this day. Having left what I knew to be a good impression before I left that night, I could almost imagine Vivian's mum questioning her as to why she hadn't chosen me instead of Chubbs as a boyfriend. I slept with a smile on my face that night. That was the start of many secret rendezvous between Vivian and me. We'd been to the cinema together, the pubs, the beach, and one night we simply decided that sitting outside her house, watching the moon in the sky under the cover of a streetlight, was good enough. It was one of those rare humid nights that simply never happen in the UK, and we'd been walking around, both exhausted from the sun. The moon was bright, and all I could hear was the soft baying of the sea waves creeping up onto the pebbles. It was a romantic situation that affected both Vivian and me. Tired, I lay down with my head in her lap, and she softly stroked my hair. I'd never felt that relaxed with another person up until that point in my life. Her perfume dazed me and set my mind to wander, and, closing my eyes with the intention of resting a little, I ended up falling asleep. When I woke up, she was lying on her side beside me on the bench. It was one of those uniquely intimate moments in your life that you always remember. My face was inches from hers, and she was staring into my eyes. She'd been watching me sleep. All I could see were the shadows of her face and the specular highlights of her eyes reflecting the moonlight. There was a tense moment, but as my eyes fell to the moisture on her lips, I moved in for the kill. That was my first kiss. I mean, a real kiss, one that meant something. It lasted a full 10 minutes, but finally, she had to go. I watched her walk up the steps to her house and give me one final smile as she closed the door. Like any lovesick guy, I tried to get in touch with her over the next few weeks, but I couldn't. It was probably obvious to others that she was trying to avoid me, but in my hopeful mind, she had a genuine reason for not getting in touch. Of course, seeing Chubbs made me feel guilty, but at least he wouldn't be able to smile at me like a smug bastard anymore when we had conversations about Vivian, hinting that he had something I would never have. It was a painful lesson to learn, but eventually, I realized that Vivian wasn't going to leave Chubbs for me. After all, she had been raised in a way that encouraged non-confrontation, and she would have found it difficult to tell me. The fact is, she was a homely girl who would basically settle for any guy who treated her nicely, without deviating. That was another thing I liked about her, it just made me want to fight harder for her. It became more and more obvious that Vivian and I had gotten up to something among our circle of friends. We were still attracted to each other despite the fact that she was still with her boyfriend and wouldn't leave him. For me, it was a constant source of anxiety and depression, waiting to see if she would make the break and go for me. I tried to manipulate situations where we could be together, but all to no avail. The basic attraction was still there, though, and our eyes met on more than one occasion across the room, noticeable to everyone. It was hard not to give the game away. There was also a tangible animosity in the air between me and Chubbs, ticking away like a bomb. Then one day, the secret was out. Vivian told Chubbs what had happened between you two, my brother informed me on a Friday evening. I had no idea what Chubbs would do the next time I saw him, and actually, if he was going to start a fight with me, I wasn't so sure I would bother fighting back. At least, I would let him get in the first few punches, as I was, in theory, the bad guy here. Call it on a glean from watching too many kung fu movies or some shit, but I just felt that I didn't want to steal a guy's girlfriend and beat the shit out of him at the same time. I was sitting down with the same group of friends on Saturday as usual when we heard the intercom. It was Chubbs, he was coming up to the flat. My heart stopped. This was it. Everybody looked at me to see if I was going to run and hide or stay and fight. We heard the door open, and I watched him come into the room, say some greetings, and sit opposite me. Vivian was behind him and quietly sat down on the couch next to my brother, not even a whisper or a glance in my direction, her eyes locked onto the TV. Chubbs was glaring at me. Something snapped inside of me, some inner monologue screaming, "Are you a pussy, Chris?" "Hello, Chubbs," I said, my eyes burning into him. "I can take you, you fat fucker," I thought. This cunt wasn't going to lay a finger on me unless he wanted it broken. I could see he was thinking. Everyone else was playing on the PlayStation, pretending as though they knew nothing, but they all had their ears pricked. He pulled a bottle of vodka out of a carrier bag and placed it on the table. "Do you want a drink?" he said in an unemotional voice. "Fuck it." Was that a smile I saw curl ever so slightly on his face? What the hell was that? Was that it? "Do you want a drink?" Here I was, half expecting to dodge a right hook and counter with a headbutt, and he calmly acts as though I hadn't had my tongue down his girlfriend's throat 2 weeks prior. My mind was racing. Was he going to get me drunk so that he could kick me while I was down? Was he stalling? Was he just going to play it cool and then crack the bottle over my head when I wasn't expecting it? I played along with his game, and we started drinking. We didn't talk, and it was obvious to every single person in that room that he knew the score, and I knew the score. The tension was mounting. I didn't let Chubbs out of my peripheral vision for a full 2 hours. But nothing happened that night. He left a little drunkenly with his girlfriend, and I was left with a puzzled look on my face. That was the last time I ever saw Chubbs. "What a pussy," one of my friends laughed. Of course, that was what they all assumed. Perhaps that was the truth, maybe he'd simply bottled it, knowing that he wasn't going to kick my ass without getting a few good licks himself. Or perhaps he'd just planned to give me the guilt trip treatment, and it had worked 100%. I felt like a true cunt and more remote from the idea of breaking up Chubbs and Vivian than ever before. Chubbs had fooled the lot of us. What was true, I found out months later, was that Chubbs actually didn't give a shit about Vivian. He didn't even fancy her, he just knew how good-looking she was and the popularity it would give him to have a girlfriend like that. All along, she was just a way for him to get at me, getting his kicks from watching the pained expression on my face as he told me tales of how he'd screwed her brains out on a regular basis. He'd never loved her and left her for a woman with 3 kids shortly after. The last I heard, he'd blown 15 grand of his grandparents' inheritance on cocaine and was a full-time drug dealer in Tunbridge Wells. After that night, I decided to grow up. I never wanted to be in the same situation again, and even though Vivian was my dream girl, I concluded she wasn't worth it in the end. I was going to change, stop being a bloody dreamer and wisher all the time. I was going to become stronger, both mentally and physically. I would make women lust after me instead of the other way around, as always. In a sense, I was going to become the kind of man women read about in romance novels. Vivian was torturing me, and I realized I'd have to cut her out of my life, along with Chubbs. I ripped up Vivian's telephone number, hid myself in my room, and, dejected, began to spend more and more time alone, waiting for the black cloud to pass over my mind. As I raked my hands through my hair night after night in distress, I wondered how long it would take for the Vivian withdrawal symptoms to wear off. When does love die? When the heart dies, I concluded. All the loves in my life are still dear to me, and even though we go our own ways, they will forever remain in my memory. Ichigo Ichiari. A Japanese expression meaning one meeting, one meaning. Vivian dated a bunch of loser guys for about a year after that until she finally ended up with another friend of mine who knows how to treat a woman with respect and is in love with her, I hear. Although I still wonder if I could have ever ended up with Vivian, in many ways I'm glad it was never meant to be, as I probably would never have gone to Japan if we had become a couple. I even stopped hanging around with my dopehead friends, although I'd see them down at the video arcade occasionally. I took up judo and entered college. Judo was a perfect outlet for my rage, and it soon became a passion of mine. Being the fit guy I was at the time, I decided to start using gym weightlifting equipment to supplement my martial arts training. One day, I nearly dropped a weight on my foot when a stunning young Japanese woman with thick black wavy hair walked in and knocked me for 6 with her smile. Little did I know she would become the main catalyst for one of the greatest adventures of my life. And the rest, they say, is young dudes' history.